I want to thank you for having me here, all of you. Al, especially, for all of the work that you do. Gatherings like this are the lifeblood, and it's the weaving in between our movements. It's the stuff that magic is made of, because it's when we get together and see each other and reflect each other back that real progress happens and the transformation happens. So I don't take these spaces for granted, and I'm really grateful to be here. I wanted to oh, there we go. Little person. I wanted to start with my story because I have a pretty, as I was preparing for this talk, I was reminded of the dog that I have in this fight and how close to home it is for me. I grew up in Los Angeles in a community called Baldwin Hills. And for those who are not familiar with Los Angeles, there's Slauson, here's La Brea, there's Culver City over here, Inglewood down here. Baldwin Hills is on the border of all of that. And when I grew up, it was called the Black Beverly Hills because there's a few places in the country where there are affluent black folks that congregate and try to keep everybody else out a little bit. And that Baldwin Hills is that area. If anybody saw Ray, the Ray Charles movie, so he lived in Baldwin Hills. That was that neighborhood. And it's been that place for African Americans for a very long time. And my parents still live there. I grew up scooting around on my scooter there. I went to Windsor Hills Elementary because Baldwin Hills, View Park, and Windsor Hills are kind of a trio up there. It's a place that's very close to my heart. And in an interesting intersection of race and class, it also is across the street from the largest urban oil field in the country, the Inglewood oil field. And when I say across the street, I mean it's across the street. I grew up driving to my elementary school, seeing the big dog things that I called them when I was 6 years old, going up and down into the ground and asking my parents what they were. It's 1,100 acres, this oil field. And it's right next to the park, where I grew up playing on the swings, right next to the park. So the thing that happened recently with the Inglewood oil fields is that there was a fight around fracking. It happened around 2012. That's when the height of it happened. But a company in Texas wanted to come in and open up the fields there for fracking. And there was an alliance that came up to try to do a ban on fracking, and I need to actually get back in touch with them and see how all that ended up. But when I think about fracking, I'm still doing some work in DC, and I'm learning. You know, sometimes you learn too much about a particular topic, and it just really scares you and freaks you out. That's kind of how I feel about fracking right now. Because Baldwin Hills is a community of older black folks. Most of the community is over 60 years old. My parents are there. And when I think about methane, when I think about what fracking would do to the water supply there, when we're already in a drought, when I think about what it would do to the park, that's my dog in this fight. That's where my parents want to grow old. So many of my friends' parents are there. My elementary school is there. I want to be able to take my kids to where I went to elementary school and not have to worry about them. So this is very important to me when we talk about local clean energy. It has my heart, and I will be in that fight forever because of my parents. My other story, Kristen mentioned People's Grocery. Energy was never something that I understood very well, I think. Food was always something easier for me. So when I was at People's Grocery and I had a conversation with Billy Parrish at Mosaic about putting solar panels on the roof, I thought, well, I know that we should be doing it. And you say that we can do it. It was so funny because I feel like my story at People's Grocery is one that's pretty instructive, especially for the African American community, right? He had this conversation with me and I was like, I don't know. So he said, we'll send someone out. We'll just measure the roof. Don't worry. And then we'll have a conversation. I said, okay, I can commit to that. And that was the whole process, right? He measured the roof. Hey, the roof actually works. So we're going to do A, B, C, D, and E. And I'm like, I don't know if we can commit to that. He's like, okay, we'll just do A and B. Don't worry. And then we'll have a conversation. And then I had a conversation with my landlord, and that was an intense conversation, right? You want to do what? You want to climb through the hole in the roof and do what? For 20 years? What? So we had to sit down and have a lot of conversations, and I got really schooled up in a very practical, blow-by-blow, 1, 2, 3 step of what it takes to bring someone along in the conversation of renewable energy. And one of the things that I think was so brilliant about that process was that I am an advocate. I worked at Green for All before I became the executive director at Green for All. I've been advocating for this for years. Our landlord is a great, great company that believes in renewable energy. But when you talk about a solar installation that has a loan over 20 years that's really expensive, and I mean, most people don't plan their lives 5 years out. That feels like a big commitment, you know? So I think I tend to like to get into brass tacks. What is it going to take concretely to get from point A to point Z? All of the alphabet steps in between. And going through that process really showed me what it takes, and it's guided my work. One thing that I want to bring up as well is that when it comes to the big picture, what does the landscape look like right now? I don't want to go into local examples because we have a lot of examples that are going to be talked about today of the people that are actually working in those communities. But I want to set the stage a little bit about what the landscape looks like. Where are we operating from? So one of the things when I was at Green for All last year we did a resiliency tour around the country. And we went to different local communities to talk to them about what resiliency looks like for them. And one of the things that kept coming up was local ownership. Over and over and over and over again. Things have been taken from us for decades because we don't own it. What is it going to take for us to own our stuff? And I mean, they were talking about land, they were talking about food, they were talking about water, they were talking about energy. I feel like there is a radicalization of local communities happening right now because we see what's happening. And actually, for a really quick example, one of the things that came up at the soil carbon workshop that I was at yesterday is when the height of the drought was happening last summer, we heard all those stories about the unincorporated towns all over California that are losing water. But now that we're coming out of winter, and when we were in the winter and when we're getting a little bit of rain, those stories tend to submerge a bit. And I heard more of those stories yesterday, and they're horrifying, right? Communities of 1,200 farm workers in an unincorporated town that are battling it out with one of the top 5 richest families in the world for who can drill the lowest well, and what can we grow in this salty water before the salty water becomes unusable, and how much can we destroy this land before it's unusable functionally, right? That's where we are. That's where we've gotten to. And that's happening with water. Energy is about to get a whole lot more dangerous because our international interests are so much more linked to all of this. So when it comes to the national scene, the word that kept coming up for me was autonomy, right? The Clean Power Plan from the EPA. They specifically designed it so that states could design their own plans. And one of the things that giving states their own ability to design their own plans does is it encourages competition. Who gets to say they're the best? When it comes to the resiliency report, the President's Resiliency Task Force last year, 26 mayors and tribal leaders from across the country, that was an aggregate of mayors. They were going down to the municipal level, the president was, to get recommendations on resiliency. And there are so many trends like that happening in DC that people are going to mayors, they're going to governors, they're going more and more local because they know that what we need right now are very concrete, very practical examples of things that work. One of the things that Van used to say all the time is that when you get to the upper levels of power and money, you find out that no one is driving the bus. And I used to think he was nuts when he said that, because of course someone's driving the bus. What do you mean? But what's true, I think the way that I think of it is that when I was a kid and me and my brothers would fight, I would look at my parents and their siblings and think, wow, one day we're gonna get along like that. And then I get older and I look at my parents and their siblings and I'm like, the level to which y'all fight is insane. And it's like bigger fighting because you're bigger people and you got bigger things to argue about than your toys, right? And that's exactly the situation. The EPA is under fire right now because of the Senate. The Clean Power Plan is in a situation where it might be delayed because entrenched interests are trying to make sure that it gets delayed. The CEQ is under fire. So many of these agencies that are meant to fight for us are struggling just like us to try to get things done. What they need is for us to go hard and go quickly so that they can lift up examples. That's all I hear. Can you give me examples of communities that have done this? Can you give me examples of how it can scale? What concretely, how much money did it cost? What did it take to bring the coalition together? How many cities can we do this in? What are the municipal policies that exist across different countries, across different states where we can do this as low-hanging fruit? I mean, there are people that are working to crank out very concrete, how do we get from point A to point Z? Where's the low-hanging fruit? So our goal should always be to be low-hanging fruit. Our goal should be to go hard and to communicate hard about the things that work. We're in desperate need of that. And in conclusion, what I'll say is that it also feels really important to me that we remember what we do this for, which is why I started with my parents. Because this work is really hard. Anyone who has been working for social change for any length of time knows that you get smeared. You know that, I mean, the level of infighting in our movement is insane, right? But the place that it comes from is that our hearts are being crushed. Our communities are being torn apart from the inside out half the time. And it hurts, and sometimes we act out. And one thing I talk about a lot is resourcing ourselves to be in this movement. And I bring that up today because when I was doing my research for this talk, and I knew about the fracking when it first came up, but I think I deliberately ignored it for a little while because I just couldn't deal with it. So having to immerse myself back in the fracking fight around Baldwin Hills, I mean, I get emotional just talking about it. Those are my parents, you know? And what's going to resource me is being able to come to places like this and have allies like you so that I know that that community is not the only one. I know that there's not a community of older black folks that are in this by themselves, who've had to work, who've had to fight, who've had to claw to get out of the poverty that they grew up in, to have a nice home with a pool in the backyard. I mean, so many older black folks, that's all they want, right? They just want to relax and not have to struggle so hard the way that they grew up struggling. I want that for my parents. I want that for your parents. I want that for you. And I want that for my children. So thank you for doing what you do, and let's go hard. And let's go quickly.